Are the days of drugging confused kids out of puberty finally coming to an end? Over the last 12 months, the pushback against puberty blockers has gone global, and even the countries that have pushed these controversial drugs the hardest are now going, hang on, maybe we went a little bit too far. In this Gender Shite news review special report, we'll give you an update on what's changed in the UK, America, Australia, but also places like Brazil, Chile, Italy, and many more. We are the only news review that calls men, men, women, women at all times, and that fully rejects the notion that children should be sterilized in order for them to be their authentic self. If you want to support our reporting, you can do so monthly via Patreon, give us a one-off tip via PayPal, we love those, or via Super Thanks here on YouTube. We love those too. Okay, grab yourself some wine, fasten your seatbelt, and let's go round the world.
A woman is an adult human female.
Gay men don't have vaginas!
It's completely wrong to refer to a child as a transgender child.
He's a man!
Okay, let's start in the UK. In April last year, the final CAS review was published, the most extensive global piece of research into gender identity services for children and adolescents. It took 4 years to produce and turned out to be a real game changer. Here's a recap of the key findings. The rationale for drugging kids out of puberty remains unclear. The effects on cognitive and psychosexual development remain unknown. There is no reliable evidence to base clinical decisions on, or for children and their families to make informed choices. Too much focus on putting kids on blockers and not enough on therapy. It also points out the healthcare needs of detransitioners. So, in summary, it's all been a huge mess, and children and adolescents have been badly let down. A number of gender quacks, media outlets, and even politicians were quick to discredit the review. People took to the street to protest.
We have demanded for the complete repudiation of the CAS review.
And Hilary Cass herself was advised to avoid using public transport after online threats and abuse. Strange how some people are so passionate about sterilizing children. But there has also been significant support for the CAS review from the likes of the Royal College of GPs, the Royal College of Psychiatrists, the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges, the Association of Clinical Psychologists, and both the former Tory and current Labour government. As a result of the review, NHS England and NHS Scotland have stopped the routine prescribing of so-called puberty blockers. The Tavistock GIDS clinic was closed and replaced with, for now, 3 regional hubs where supposedly a holistic approach is used instead of the affirmation model. The then Tory government also put in place a temporary ban on private prescribing.
Today I want to set out my clear intention to introduce a banning order on puberty blockers with limited exceptions under Section 62 of the Medicines Act 1968. This is an extraordinary use of that power, but it is the right use of that power because we must protect our children and young people from this risk to their safety.
This ban was challenged in the High Court by Transsexual UK with help from the Good Law Project, but was found to be entirely lawful. After Labour won the election, it extended the ban twice before making it permanent.
I am acting on the Commission's advice to put an indefinite order in place to restrict the sale or supply of puberty blockers through a prescription issued by either a private UK prescriber or a prescriber registered outside the UK for under 18s. The legislation will be updated today and will be reviewed in 2027.
But does that mean it's the end of puberty blockers in the UK? No. Those already on the blockers through the NHS will continue to get them, and males who've gone onto estrogen may also still get them to block their natural testosterone production. The NHS is also forking out nearly £11 million for a new and rather contested clinical trial. So there's no evidence for these drugs. There's no way to make an informed clinical decision. We don't know what the effects on the brain are, but hey, let's put some kids on them anyway and see what happens. The trial is supported by Health Secretary Wes Streeting and was also a key recommendation by the CAS review, which shows that for all the good stuff in the review, it never grappled with the heart of the matter, the very idea that trans is just completely bonkers. It also stated that for some children and young adolescents, the best outcome would be transition. So CAS and the Labour government still leave the door open to kids being drugged out of puberty, and that door is the clinical trial. Strangely, the trial will only follow subjects for 2 years, so it won't be able to offer any insights into the long-term effects, one of the key unknowns.
The CAS review made clear that there is not enough evidence about the long-term effects of using puberty blockers to treat gender incongruence to know whether they are safe or beneficial.
The trial is yet to get ethical approval from the Health Research Authority, but has already come under fire, and a judicial review will be launched by James Esses and Kira Bell should it go ahead. Following the recent landmark judgment by the Supreme Court that trans women are not women for the purposes of the Equality Act, campaign groups Sex Matters, LGBT Alliance, Transgender Trend and GenSpect have written to Health Secretary Wes Streeting to cancel plans for the trial immediately, as they argue that the premise for blockers has now fallen away, as for example, a boy who wants to be a girl would still have to use male single-sex spaces and would still be legally male. Tavistock whistleblower Dr. David Bell has also rung the alarm about the trial.
I do not think it's appropriate to put children on an experimental, which is still, I would regard, as a kind of experiment, when we know that the drugs have serious consequences and damaging consequences. So why would we put children in a position like that?
And there is heat from across the pond. A comprehensive review by the US Department of Health and Human Services, published on the 1st of May, has branded the use of blockers in trials as not ethical and recommends testing on animals first. We'll keep you posted with news on the trial. And then there is, of course, child transitioner-in-chief Susie Green, who, despite the indefinite ban on private prescribing, is trying everything she can do to find loopholes to get as many kids drugged out of puberty as possible.
Children, where are you? I know you're here somewhere.
She has founded a new business called Ann Health that she promotes, of all places, at pride parades. Gotta get those gays while you can.
Bitch, what the fuck? Bitch, what the fuck?
So, quite an incredible 12 months here in the UK, but we're far from out of the woods. Let's have a look at what's happening across the sea. The Netherlands is the very birthplace of puberty blockers for confused kids. In response to the CAS review, the Amsterdam Gender Clinic released a statement basically saying, "We do things our way, we're just fine, thank you. Bye." They disagree that there is insufficient evidence. The Dutch Parliament, however, takes a different view and has passed a motion for the government to conduct research into the physical and mental health outcomes of puberty blockers. The research will be a retrospective cohort study of 1,750 individuals and is projected to finish in 2027. So until then, when it comes to transing Dutch kids, it's full steam ahead. Everybody get on the transition train now. Come on, children, get onto the blockers. In Belgium, a small group of pediatricians and psychiatrists have also called for the reform of gender care for children and adolescents following a 60% rise in Belgian teenagers being prescribed blockers. They appear to be lone voices in Belgium, but it's a start. Over to Germany. In March 2024, draft guidelines were published that very much push for puberty blockers. Perhaps unsurprising, as at least one of its authors holds a university position paid for by Ferring, a company that produces blockers. Surprise, surprise! One of the authors is Achim Wusthoff, the endocrinologist who transed Kim Petras in 2005, and a couple of years ago published a paper where he admitted that most of these kids would simply grow up to be gay, but that he was happy to take the risk of, in his own words, preventing a homosexual development. But no one's transing away the gay. It's not a thing. Interestingly, the document itself pointed out that the guidelines are not based on evidence, but rather on consensus. So, a bunch of people saying, rather than, I want the truth! The draft guidelines dropped age limits, rejected the idea that psychiatric comorbidities might need to be taken into account, dismissed the need for psychotherapy, and even replaced the word patient with treatment seeker. In other words, they completely lost the plot. In response, the Bundesärztekammer, a German medical assembly, about 250 delegates from 17 different German medical associations, passed a resolution to restrict puberty blockers to controlled clinical trials only, noting the lack of evidence and the lifelong consequences of youth medical transitioning. This is an independent body and its resolutions do not have binding authority. A 100-page critique of the guidelines was also published by a group of 15 child and adolescent psychiatrists. Following the criticism, the guidelines were redrafted and finally published in March 2025. They now recognize that most adolescents do not need to transition, acknowledge the role of social influences, require psychological evaluations in all cases, and that comorbidities need to be taken into account.
Yeah, no shit, Sherlock!
But there is no guidance on how to distinguish between those for whom it will be just a phase and those who will persist having issues. It does say that blockers should generally not be given to non-binaries, but says that for others they are beneficial and fully reversible.
Come on, seriously.
Because the guidelines are not based on evidence. Overall, it's very much aligned with WPATH's latest standards of care, and even in its redrafted form cannot resist trashing the CAS review. A number of medical organizations in Germany have not accepted the guidelines. They were also meant to be used in Austria and Switzerland, but Switzerland has announced that it will do its own review of the guidelines before accepting them. So, a mixed bag of bratwurst that still leaves the door open to kids being transed. To the north of Germany, we have its neighbor, Denmark. Denmark sharply reversed course on blockers in 2023 after noticing the huge increase in patients, how they often have a whole bunch of other psychological issues, and how so many of them are girls. The social influence was also acknowledged and the rising number of detransitioners. Following the change, which was praised by the Danish health minister, therapy is now prioritized and blockers are only given to those who have had long-term issues with their sex. The number of minors given these drugs fell from 65% to 6% between 2018 and 2022. Okay, next, Poland. January this year, a Polish scientific review specifically looking at bone density found that not only do blockers lead to bone loss, but that this may not be restored to pre-blocker levels when going onto testosterone or estrogen, and that this particularly affects boys. The authors also highlight the lack of research. In other words, it's still just one big experiment. Okay, we're going south to Italy. In January, the Italian Health Ministry launched a probe into the country's primary youth gender clinic at Careggi University Hospital in Florence, after one of the endocrinologists and psychologists there claimed that therapy should not be a requirement for being given blockers, which goes against Italy's national guidelines. The investigation found data reporting to be weak and psychiatric support to be lax. In some cases, children were prescribed blockers without having been assessed by a national health neuropsychiatrist. A criminal investigation was opened to decide whether the medical practices at Careggi constitute a criminal offense. In November, Italy's National Bioethics Committee released new guidance stating that blockers should only be provided after mental health interventions had failed and only in the context of research trials. It recommended that the Ministry of Health undertake a systemic evidence review and establish a high-quality clinical trial. From Italy, we're going to go to France. Last November, the French Society of Pediatric Endocrinology and Diabetology produced a document pushing for the affirmative approach. In France, there are no national guidelines for the prescribing of blockers, so the SFEDP conducted a literature review and came up with its own proposal, which is more like a sales manual. Back in 2022, France's National Academy of Medicine urged the greatest caution and highlighted the issue of overdiagnosis, but the SFEDP does not acknowledge any of this. Neither does it acknowledge how other countries have changed direction, let alone mention the CAS review. And of course, it claims that puberty blockers are reversible. Yes, even in 2024. The team consisted of 19 hormone specialists, 17 of whom are involved with some of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world. So there's your explanation. Interestingly, a big part of the review is dedicated to fertility preservation, a whole other area where there's money to be made when you set out to sterilize children. In marketing, this is called cross-selling.
Money, 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 must be funny in the rich man's world.
And that ends our visit to Europe. Let's go to the land down under. Australia seems to be looking at the most trans-crazy countries in the world and go, anything you can do, I can do better. And affirmation has been the name of the game there for years. In February 2024, an independent systemic review commissioned by the government of New South Wales found blockers to be safe, effective, reversible, although it acknowledged that the strength of evidence was low. When the CAS review came out, it was trashed, and any attempts by Senator Pauline Hanson to ban blockers and to get a parliamentary inquiry into blockers all failed.
Here in Australia, the government has repeatedly denied an inquiry into the rapid increase in children attending gender clinics and how they are being treated. If you care about the children out there, then why won't you have an inquiry? Why are you a bunch of gutless wonders who will not stand up for these children?
But then a scandal broke at a clinic in Cairns, Queensland. May last year, a whistleblower at the Cairns Sexual Health Services claimed children as young as 12 were put on blockers without authorized care and sometimes even without parental consent. An internal review confirmed that this was the case. In response, the Queensland Health Minister Tim Nicholls halted the prescribing of blockers for new patients in January and announced a statewide independent review into gender services for minors. The next day, a letter signed by 100 doctors, academics, lawyers, politicians and detransitioners called on the Australian government to pause the use of blockers nationwide and launch a public inquiry. The letter was organised by Women's Forum Australia and warns of a public health disaster of generational significance. Days after, the Federal Health Minister Mark Butler announced he had tasked the National Health and Medical Research Council to carry out a national review. But there are concerns that this will be driven by trans ideologues and that it could be an attempt to derail the Queensland review.
Transgender activists from OzPath and from an organisation called Transcend are going to be the ones essentially driving this very slow bus. And I cannot see a reason for this massive 18-month time frame just to receive an interim report on puberty blockers when for the last 5 years internationally we've had reputable, well-conducted systematic review after reputable, well-conducted systematic review telling us that there's a lack of evidence of benefit for puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones.
Following his announcement, Mark Butler then asked the Queensland government to withdraw the plans for their own review. But they went, "Up yours, mate!" And so they'll be carrying on with their own, which is expected to be delivered in November. Australian-wide interim guidance on the use of blockers is expected by mid-2026. The Queensland ban triggered a Protect Trans Youth National Day of Action, with thousands of people protesting at 20 rallies across the country.
We see the rising tide of anti-queer rhetoric. We fear for our lives, for our rights, and we are expected to just give up, accept our fate, and quietly let the Trump wannabes in Parliament ruin our futures and dehumanize us? Well, fuck that and fuck them!
We have a message for the Queensland government. Come on, Queensland! Tim Nichols!
What's happening next door in New Zealand? New Zealand prescribes puberty blockers up to 7 times more compared to England and Wales, but now also seems to be reconsidering its approach. This began a few years ago when in 2022 the New Zealand Ministry of Health removed the words safe and reversible from a section on puberty blockers. In November last year, it released its own evidence brief following a literature review that includes the Cass report. Like Cass, it concluded that evidence was poor and urged a more cautionary approach with holistic care as a starting point. Health agencies will now develop updated guidelines for clinicians and find ways to strengthen the evidence base. The ministry has also conducted a targeted consultation on introducing tighter controls, which closed in January, but no results have been published publicly yet. Over 13 professional health bodies have already voiced opposition to restrictions being introduced, and hundreds of people protested outside Parliament in Wellington last March. The protest was organised by Queer Endurance in Defiance, who campaigned for hormonal interventions to be available on demand. Give it to me, baby! From New Zealand, we're going to go all the way across the oceans to Brazil. La, 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 la. Last April, the Federal Council of Medicine, Brazil's National Medical Association, unanimously approved a new resolution prohibiting the use of puberty blockers due to concerns about side effects and risks of regret. It also pointed to blockers being banned in the UK. The resolution counters the Brazilian government's plans to make it easier for people to get sex mimicry medical interventions, although these plans have not been officially adopted yet. The resolution has been published, and any doctors going against it and still providing blockers to minors could potentially lose their license. Trans activists are up in arms, of course, and looking to challenge it at the Supreme Court, which unfortunately is very pro-trans. Shout out to Matria, sorry, don't know how to say this, in Portuguese, an organization in Brazil that's been pushing back against the trans madness there and have lobbied the Federal Council of Medicine and are looking to intervene should the resolution indeed be challenged at the Supreme Court. You can follow them on X here. We're going to stay in Latin America and go to Chile. In June last year, Chile's health minister reportedly ordered the public health system to stop providing puberty blockers to new patients, citing the weakness of evidence. The decision came in the wake of the Cass review and the country's first ever critical mainstream media report on so-called gender-affirming care that featured testimonies from detransitioners. Shortly after, one of Chile's main private health providers, UC Christus Health Network, announced it would stop prescribing hormonal interventions to minors and is expected to be updating its clinical guidelines. The House of Representatives then launched an investigation into the country's Grow with Pride program, which is basically a state-funded trans the children conveyor belt, open to kids as young as 3. Around 4,000 children were on it in 2023 and 2024 alone. A commission was put together that produced a report highly critical of Grow with Pride's affirmative approach. It noted how the use of blockers was not authorized by Chile's health regulator, how parental consent procedures were absent or inconsistent, and highlighted the systemic medical, legal, and ethical failings by the state. It called for an immediate ban on hormonal and surgical interventions on minors. Good news! Only this week, the House of Representatives voted overwhelmingly to adopt the findings of that report. Support came from across the House, the left, the center, the right, and so Chile has become the first Latin American country to confront the madness of transing children through a democratic process. It is widely expected that the House of Congress will now move to put legislation in place to bar the use of blockers, as well as wrong-sex hormones and surgeries for minors. I want to give a shout out to parent group Kairos and also to Detrans Chile, who have been working their asses off to bring awareness to these issues for years. You can follow them on X at @agroup_Kairos and at dtrans_Chile. Let's go from South America to North America, all the way to Canada. Even in Canada, one of the most gender-affirming countries in the world, changes are afoot. Last year, the government of Alberta introduced Bill 26 that bans the prescribing of blockers to those under 16, unless they're already on them or if some other exemptions apply.
For children aged 15 and under, puberty blockers and hormone therapies for the purpose of gender reassignment or affirmation will also not be permitted, with the exception of those who've already commenced their treatment at this time.
The ban came into effect when the bill received royal assent last December. The very next day, 2 LGBT what-the-fuck organizations and some confused kids launched legal action to challenge the bill's constitutionality. And, of course, there were protests.
Her policy will put thousands of children at risk.
Alberta NDP leader Rachel Notley joined protesters in Edmonton who rallied simultaneously with another demonstration in Calgary.
In January, a new Canadian study echoed the findings of the Cass Review, concluding that the evidence for blockers is of such low certainty it's impossible to know whether they help or harm. The study followed 174 kids across Canada, of which 74% were put on blockers. But the big news, of course, comes from its neighbour, the United States of America. There have been huge changes in the States from the moment Trump started his second term as president. He didn't waste any time taking aim at the gender madness and signed an executive order to
stop the chemical, physical, and emotional mutilation of our youth, a process that includes giving kids puberty blockers.
It only applies to federally run insurance programs and medical institutions receiving federal grants. In response, a number of hospitals decided to pause so-called gender-affirming care for kids and teens. And of course, people came out to protest, like here in New York.
Most importantly, I am here today as the mother of a proud trans man. I am here today as the aunt of a proud trans man. My best friend's kid is trans, and my kid's best friend is trans.
Can you believe this?
All the kids are trans. In our family. In my family. Following legal action, the executive order has so far been blocked in 5 states: Maryland, Washington, Minnesota, Oregon, and Colorado. Prior to Trump returning to office, over 26 states had already either banned or restricted access to puberty blockers. Tennessee passed such a ban in 2023.
It bans dangerous cross-sex hormone treatments, puberty blockers, and disabling medical procedures on minors.
And ever since, there's been legal wrangling about whether the ban was lawful.
By the governor signing off on these laws, he's suppressing us. He's supporting the oppression that we see from our legislation, from these decisions.
Last December, the case, known as United States versus Scrimeti, ended up all the way in the Supreme Court for a landmark hearing. We're still waiting for the judgment, although the Supreme Court could decide not to get involved in it at all and send it back to the Circuit Court of Appeal. A similar ban by the state of Montana, also from 2023, has just been ruled unconstitutional by the Montana Supreme Court. It concluded that the state was trying to block transgender expression for political and ideological reasons, apparently missing the irony that it's the blocking of puberty, which is ideological.
And isn't it ironic? Don't you think?
Speaking of ideology, on the 1st of May, an independent review commissioned by the Trump administration was published. The 409-page report is highly critical of the weak evidence base used to justify, among other things, the use of blockers. It highlights the need for therapy instead of medical interventions and makes the case that clinicians should follow the science, not activist agendas. It trashes the current guidelines from WPATH and the Endocrine Society, and also how US providers are flouting even those and are pretty much just making things up as they go along. It's this report that also claims that any clinical trial for blockers, such as the one planned by NHS England, would not be ethical and should be conducted on animals instead. The report does not act as a clinical guideline or issue policy recommendations, but it is intended to give a comprehensive overview of the evidence, or lack thereof, and the ethical issues involved. LGBTQIA-NBP to What the Fuck Plus organisation GLAAD was quick to dismiss it as rubbish because blah blah authentic self blah blah trans blah blah blah. So, like in other places, quite a mixed bag in the US, and we'll be seeing these illegal proceedings rambling on for a good while yet. Oh, and this just in. The House of Representatives has just passed Trump's tax and spending bill that will shape his administration's spending for the coming year. The bill cuts Medicaid funding for sex mimicry interventions, not just for minors, like puberty blockers, but for people all ages.
Very simple.
It also removes these interventions as an essential health benefit from Obamacare. The bill will have to go through the Senate next. If it becomes law, it will take effect on the 1st of January 2027. And now we're done!
You're not done yet!
What? More? The state of Utah also banned gender-affirming care for minors in 2023, and of course there was a protest. But the bill also explicitly called for a medical evidence review, and that review has now been published. And in contrast with the Trump study, the CAST review and so many others concludes that drugging kids out of puberty is indeed safe, effective, that there is virtually no regret, and that policies preventing access to blockers cannot be justified. The 2023 ban may now well be lifted. Okay, last story. The governor of Colorado has just signed a bill into law forcing private insurers to cover sex mimicry interventions. So, those who won't be able to get blockers covered by Medicaid will now be able to get them via private insurance paid for by everybody else. One of the bill's sponsors is Representative and Man with Magical Lady Feels Brianna Tatone, who's been pushing for this for a few years.
When it comes to gender-affirming care, 29 different medical associations agree that gender-affirming care is actually good care that helps kids get through the depression of gender dysphoria. The bill that I was sponsoring is focused on creating a shield for Colorado. We want people to come here to Colorado or to receive the care that they need here, because here in Colorado it's legally protected health care.
Ridiculous.
Okay, and now we are done. For now. Whew, that was quite a trip, wasn't it? And it looks like it isn't going to be over any day soon. But at least we can see now that the pushback is happening around the world, that it's moving beyond being a bipartisan issue to now being recognized by different parties across the political spectrum, and that the activist hold on medicine is being dislodged. We'll have to keep our eyes wide open. No rest for the wicked. Two excellent sources of information are the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine and Gender Clinic News by Bernard Lane. Do check him out. That's it from us for now. Thank you so much for joining us, and see you in the next one. Ciao!
A woman is a woman and a man is a man. A woman is a woman and a man is a man. You can try to pretend that you don't understand, but a woman is a woman and a man is a man.
Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to my PayPal and Patreon supporters. Because of you, I can make videos like this. Special shout out to my big spenders. Helper Open, Mama Turv and the Turventines, me Julie, the lovely Mary, Julia, Dusty, Joodles, Leffy, Dorothy, Wildfire, Esther, and Martha. Thank you.